Welcome to the show. Here's my dad.
On this episode of the Infant Adoption Guide podcast, we talk with Brittany Salmon, a mom of 4, 2 through adoption, and author of the new book, It Takes More Than Love, a Christian guide to navigating the complexities of cross-cultural adoption. Hey, welcome back to the show, the Infant Adoption Guide podcast. My name's Tim Elder, a dad of 3 through infant adoption. This is where we talk about infant adoption. So if you're new to adoption or you've already started the adoption process, you may feel alone and overwhelmed and just confused and wanting some help and support. And where do you find it? How do you get it? Nobody around you's adopting. Nobody can even speak the language that you're speaking when it comes to adoption. Well, I'm inviting you into a brand new adoption community that we've created just for you, just for me, people like us that can come together, meet each other, support each other, get answers to questions, learn from experts, but especially doing something I don't know of it done anywhere else on the internet, and that is putting together people into small buddy groups. This is where we get together in groups, small groups of 5 to 6, 7, 8 people on a Zoom chat or a phone call, so you can get rid of that loneliness, that doubt, that overwhelm feeling that you got, like nobody else is knowing what I'm going through. We do. And you can find that in the Infant Adoption Guide community. Go to infantadoptionguide.com/membership. You can figure out how to get into our one-of-a-kind community, be part of these buddy groups. They're powerful, and we're building this great place online, infantadoptionguide.com/membership. So thank you for joining me today. We have a great show. Brittany is here, author, a mom, a wife, a professor. She is passionate about talking about adoption. She wrote a new book that we're going to discuss today and weave in some of her story as well. I just love how she has taken the time to write this book and really share her advice, her wisdom. And you'll hear how her and her husband have started the process to adopt again. And we'll jump into the interview right now. All right. Welcome to the show, Brittany. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Love talking to authors, especially authors like you who are a mom through adoption. So we can't have too many adoption books. When I remember starting years ago when we started our adoption process, I wish I had more adoption books, and there's been a bunch more that came into this. So I'm glad you took the time and the effort. I know it's an effort to write this book because I think it's going to be a great help to a bunch of people. So thank you for taking the time to share your story and share your love for adoption and all about the book. We'll dive into that here in a little bit, but I'd first like you to share your story. Like, what did your adoption journey look like? Can you share how that came to be?
Sure. So my husband and I, when we were engaged, actually, we started talking about what it would look like to build a family. And I remember on one particular date, I shared with him the news that it was actually highly unlikely for us to conceive biological children. I had known that from an early age, from my early teens on, that the likelihood of me conceiving children was unlikely. And so from the beginning of our marriage, we had just kind of decided, well, we're not going to pursue fertility treatments, just not because there's anything wrong with that. We have many friends and family members who have, but we just felt, you know what we can do? We could adopt instead. We felt qualified. We felt like we could equip ourselves to do it. And so it's something that we became really passionate about and pursuing. However, 2 years into our marriage, we were very shocked and surprised to find out that we were pregnant with twins.
Yes.
We were shocked to find out we were pregnant, and even more so to find out that there were 2 in there. And so our girls, Felicity and Noelle, they were born prematurely, about a month, or they were born at 31 weeks. Spent about a month in the NICU. And when we got on our feet after that, a few years later, we looked at each other and said, you know, I still feel very called to this idea of adoption, that there was something that we had learned about. We had started, kind of prepping our family for this step. And we thought, you know what, let's do it. Let's continue to grow our family that way. We wanted to have a bigger family. And so we thought, hey, why not us? And we kind of went through those questions of why not us? Do we have the capacity the ability, the bandwidth, all those things. And at the end of the day, we decided, yes, let's pursue adoption. And so that's kind of what our journey to adopting
Mm-hmm.
looked like.
Yep. And then so when you started the process, did you jump in with an agency, or how did you do an independent adoption?
And so we have, with our two sons, we have domestic infant open adoptions.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were a part of a local church that had a large, what they call an orphan care and prevention community, which means that there are people involved in all different ways, whether it's foster care, adoption, international adoption, maybe birth mom support, single mom support, any of these sort of ways you can get involved in. And so we just started kind of exploring the different ways. We actually initially started out pursuing international adoption because that's what a lot of our friends were
Mm-hmm.
pursuing. But we had a dear friend who lived about an hour away, and she was partnering with a local agency to adopt a child domestically. And she kept saying, "Hey, we have such a need for families who are willing to adopt domestically, but who are also maybe don't have like a really long list of things that you're unwilling to accept, if that makes sense. Whether it's ethnicity, whether it's medical needs, whether it's a wide variety of things, so there's a need right now." And so we said, hey, you know what? We can do that. So we just kind of slowly started exploring and then switched paths and partnered with that local agency and adopted our first son, Jude. And again, it was a domestic infant open adoption. And so we have a great relationship with his birth mom and a few members of his first family. And then a few years later, we actually moved not long after he was born. We moved to Texas, and we partnered with another agency very similar to our first locally, and we adopted again domestically an infant with an open adoption. And that was Zeke, and he's now 2 years old.
Oh,
And we're
wow.
actually home study ready for our third adoption, but for our fifth child. So we're in
Excellent.
that waiting phase right now.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
You're starting the roller coaster again, I think.
All over again. All over again.
I know what that's like. Yes.
Yes.
Well, that's fun. That is great. That's so you're living it as you're, writing the book and raising kids, and now you have the book out and getting out there to folks. You're still living through it. So that's awesome.
Yes.
That's great that you're doing that. Talking about your book, and the book, read it myself, and it's a great read. It's called "It Takes More Than Love: A Christian Guide to Navigating the Complexities of Cross-Cultural Adoption." And you got so much good stuff packed in here that, I mean, it is an easy read. The thing I love about it the most is that anybody that's considering adoption, or after you even started the process, there's good stuff in here that is important for you to understand and read, even if you're not necessarily going to do a transracial or cross-cultural adoption, because you talk about things that go over all of adoption. So what do I mean by that? Well, adoption language, you talk about the complexities of it, you talk about open adoption. But the thing that anybody that is considering adoption, I think is really important, is as you're going into it, you have to make the choice. Do you want to be a family that is considering transracial adoption? This book is going to help you big time with that consideration, and you should consider it. So I'm glad that you wrote this book, because it really is going to help a lot of people as they're starting the journey and even afterwards. And I mean, you got so many quotes in here I've highlighted and pulled out, but I think this one's really cool. How you just say being an adoptive parent's hard enough, but when your family is multiracial, it gets even trickier. Parenting transracially doesn't come naturally, nor does it just happen with time. Love is essential, yet by itself, love isn't enough. Cross-cultural parenting also takes intentionality, listening, learning, growing, repenting, changing, then starting all over and doing it again. It's hard work.
Yeah.
I love that, and I love you just to kind of expound on that a little bit and talk about why that. I mean, it seems like that may be the reason why you even wrote the book. Is that true?
Absolutely. That's absolutely it. So, like you, when we first started our adoption journey, one of the hard parts was I was looking for a resource.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking for resources that could equip us for this. And of course, there were some books out, but I could not find any that
Mm-hmm.
equipped a family to prepare for cross-cultural or transracial adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's one of those things where I wanted it to be an easy read. I wanted this book to be easily accessible to a wide variety of people and hit on a lot of topics. But essentially, I wrote it because I wanted this resource. I wanted the resource that I wished I had. And I wanted this resource for other families when
Mm-hmm.
they're considering, praying through, trying to figure out, or even just if they already have, saying, all right, we're in over our heads here. What's the next best step? I wanted to have a resource out there for families.
Yeah, and why it takes more than love. I mean, I think I talked about it a little bit in that quote that I just read, but why it takes more than love.
When we were coming up with the title for this book, I initially, actually, this rarely happens in book writing industry. A lot of times the title gets changed and tweaked, and it was tweaked. But my first working title was called More Than Love,
Mm-hmm.
and we switched it to It Takes More Than Love. And one of the reasons why that this was such a foundational idea is that I think so often in the adoption community right now, I'll actually say, probably, let me correct that, not right now, but probably the last decade, the last 2 decades, we have heard a lot of flowery, beautiful language around adoption.
Mm-hmm.
Adoption is beautiful. Adoption is love. Adoption, all you need is love, and love makes a family. And here's the thing: is those things are not false statements. They're true. They can be beautiful. Adoption does take love, but those things left by themselves without any other maybe caveat or saying, hey, adoption is beautiful, but also there are some really hard aspects to it.
Mm-hmm.
Adoption is also birthed from trauma. And so, yes, love makes a family, but if you are going to adopt and adopt transracially specifically, it's going to take just more than just loving a kid, to raise them and to give them a healthy identity and to work through some of the trauma from their adoption. And so, yes, love makes a family, but also it takes more than love. And so I wanted to title the book with something maybe a little flashy, but to say, hey, adoption's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we're an adoptive family. We're pro adoption. At the same time, it takes a lot more than just walking into this blind and thinking, we're just going to welcome a kid into our home and that's that. We're done. And so after the adoption finalized, there's so much more parenting, and specific parenting to adoptive families that needs to take place in order for children and the family to thrive.
Yeah, and as you've said, uh, I wrote this down, so I'm assuming it was in your book and not on your website. But you said our family stands out because you say you go to the grocery store. You can't even go to the grocery store without someone stopping and asking you about your kids because you have two identical twin daughters with bright blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. And then you have your two kids that you've adopted that look completely different. And I'm sure every single person looking at you go, oh, what's up with that family?
What's going on
Yeah,
here?
what's going on here?
What's going
And
on here?
and and
Yes.
the more bold people will go, "Hey, what about your what's going on with your family?" And so I'm sure you have to take a lot of time answering questions or not. How do you typically handle that when you walk in a grocery store and you get all that?
It really varies, and I will say there are a wide variety of responses,
Mm-hmm.
but there are a few things that I keep in mind when I'm out in public. The first is, my kids are always listening,
Yep.
and not just my children who are joined our family through adoption, but my biological children are also listening, and we are teaching them also how to respond. So
Mm-hmm.
however I act, however I respond, I'm also modeling a way for whenever my sons are in school and they're like, wait, you're and my son, who's African American, says, wait, you're black. Their friend says, you're black. Your mom's white. What's going on there? That way,
Yep.
he's seen me
Yeah.
navigate this and not get flustered or not get super angry
Mm-hmm.
or the times when I needed to draw a firm line and say, hey, no, absolutely not. You cannot ask that. This is private information.
Mm-hmm.
But the first thing I always keep in mind is my kids are always watching and I'm modeling their behavior for them. And I am not responding in a way that is to put any stranger at ease. I'm responding in a way that protects my family and equips my family for the future. And so I filter my responses. It's depending on the person, whether their intentions are good or bad, or whether they're just being nosy or they're genuinely curious and caring. My first filter is, hey, my kids are listening, and I'm teaching them. And then based after that is I'm going through and saying, all right, I can give, I can brush it off, I can shut the conversation down, or I can educate them in a way that still protects our private information that is none of their business, but also says, hey, this is, yes, we're an adoptive family, and thanks for your curiosity. Have a great day, and turn and walk away.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the book, I actually think I give a list of my responses
Yeah,
based on various
you do.
scenarios.
Yep.
Because what happened was when I first became an adoptive parent, I would go into a grocery store and somebody would say something, and I would either be so mad at myself after leaving for the way I responded because it was either too harsh, or maybe I said too
Mm-hmm.
much or not enough, or maybe I didn't protect my kids in the way that I should, but I would just get flustered.
Yeah.
And so I was like, you know what? I need to have some key phrases that I have in my pocket that I have practiced, that I know, that I have rehearsed at home and can say, and then and say this quickly to somebody else, and then turn and walk away, and to try to get out of a conversation or to try to shut something down in a gracious way that doesn't cause a scene in the middle of the Target grocery line. You know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, and that's the key, and that's the beauty of the book is you have to think about those things before you get into those circumstances, because you might say the wrong thing, or you might feel bad about what you said afterwards, and you might not have handled it as gracefully as you wanted to. So I really like that. Yeah, chapter 10 in your book goes through a lot of that, the responses and things like that you've thought through really, really well. And you tell some good stories in that kind of shape how you've responded and and why. So that's written really well. And that's a great part of the book, because I think even before you adopt, if you think about how you would respond, you're in that, just kind of picture yourself in that situation where, okay, yes, we've adopted transracially and we look different, and how am I going to respond? And am I willing to respond? And am I willing to protect my children and protect my family and protect their story every time we walk into a grocery store? Or am I willing to have those kinds of conversations and educate, especially my friends and family, who
Yeah.
you don't know how we're going to react? How did you do that with your friends and family? Did you prepare them before you adopted and saying, hey, this is what's going to happen. Here's how we are building our family. And we want to talk to you about that. Did you sit them all down with that, or how did you handle those?
We did, and it was really fun. I will say at the beginning, the first time is we got a couple of adoption books, and
Mm-hmm.
again, they were more like why are we adopting books. They answer the question of why the need for adoption, and that's and so one of the things that I wanted to do with this book again was this is for adoptive families, but also an extended family could read the whole book, but they could also just read. I have a chapter specifically for families
Yes.
and communities supporting adoptive families, because I wish more than anything we didn't know what we didn't know at the time, but I wish I could have given my family and said, "Hey, we're going to enter into this journey, and we want you to lock arms with us and to walk with us in this journey as aunts, uncles, grandparents, etc. And here is a quick 10-page chapter that you could read that would really help us, just kind of create a better ethos in our family, that kind of celebrates the culture of adoption, and also equips you to not only celebrate but to also acknowledge some of the hard things that we're going to have to
Mm-hmm.
face." And so what we did at the time was we kind of ignored the hard things part, and we were like, "Hey, we're going to adopt," and everybody in our family was on board, and they celebrated, and they were excited, and they understood that transracial adoption is complex, but none of us actually, I think, fully knew how complex until we got into it. And so, some of the things that we have done since is just even just when it comes to racism, and have to have certain conversations of like, "Hey, racism it is a real thing that you will face and that your children will face." And so it needs to be understood not just in our immediate family, but also in our extended family and community, because we're not going to take our kids into spaces that are where racial bias or racism, explicit racism can also exist. And so having those conversations on the front end, and kind of inviting people into the journey along with you, is really helpful. But I'm also hoping that this book helps save some families from the mistakes we made along the way, and save some extended families from some of the mistakes they, our families have made along the way. And so, it's a one of those things where yes, adoption impacts your immediate family, but if you are close with your extended family, with grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, it really is a communal thing, because you're adopting a child just not into your family but to your whole family, and you want to make sure that those spaces are spaces where your child can be known and loved and can thrive fully for who they are.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the chapter in the book is called Adoption Allies. I mean, that's a perfect way to put it because uh, you have to have people around you that are allies. And maybe not everyone will be. But if you can give them this book and have them pass it around or buy several copies and have them read that chapter, that's huge for them just to understand what you're going through or your child's going through. And you give pointers in there of exactly of what to say or not say. I mean,
Yeah.
that's perfect. That's what people need to hear. And I don't know if there are hardly any other books that go through that someone outside of adoption, but that knows somebody close to them that is adopting can pick up and read and go, oh, yeah, okay. I understand that. That makes some sense. So I'm glad you wrote that chapter. That's one of the most powerful ones in there. I think that everybody can use.
Well, and I think honestly, a lot of people want to learn.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the thing is there's so many people out there in your church communities, your teachers.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who come up to us regularly. I'm sure it's happened to you. Say, hey, tell us what we can do to help. What would be helpful here? And I just wanted somebody to say, hey, all I want you to do is read these 10 pages. And, like, that's it.
It's not that hard. Yeah.
Just read this. Just read this and pray through it and
Yeah.
see if any of it applies to you. And I really do believe that, people are, people can figure out what is the next best step for them after having read those
Yeah.
few pages.
Yep. Yeah. But it's a big chapter to get and to read and share with others.
Yeah.
Let's just go through your book. You go through all pretty much every aspect of transracial or cross-cultural adoption, but I wanted to ask you why you chose the term cross-cultural rather than transracial.
So cross-cultural, when we got into it, actually, that's one of the things I did. The initial title did have transracial adoption in it.
Mm-hmm.
But as we got further along we realized, well, transracial adoption is only discussing adoption that where the set of parents and the child, their ethnicities are not the same and it's visible. So it's a different race, different skin color. But the reality is there are a lot of adoptions that take place that are cross-cultural. That where you still have the same skin tones, but the same thing and the same content still needs to be applied. So a child who is adopted internationally, let's say it's a white American couple adopting a white Russian child, we still need to honor and respect and learn about their first culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we quickly realized is that, okay, so this instance here, I'm talking about transracial adoption, but over here, I'm talking about international or transcultural adoption. And it's still same race technically because we're just talking about skin color here. But this content still applies. So what is a good term that can encapsulate both international, same race, but then also transracial, whether it's domestic or international? And cross-cultural is a term that we just settled on that we've seen in other adoption literature, but it really does encapsulate both ideas well.
Definitely. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Because it does, a lot of people adopting in different ways and different races and different cultures. So that does make sense. And it's all about honoring and respecting and teaching really the adoptee that their heritage, their background, where they came from is important.
Yes.
And that's what I love more than anything about your book. You talk about holding space for both joy and sorrow in your home. Can you give us like a practical example of what that looks like in your family?
Sure. That was, I will say, making space for joy and sorrow both to exist. It was something that I wasn't prepared for the first time we adopted. I went into the hospital room where my son was after he was born, and I went in with his first mom and to meet him. And when she left, I remember thinking I should be feeling only excitement
Mm-hmm.
about our son, just like overjoyed to meet him. And I was overjoyed to meet him. I was like over the moon, just already smitten. He was just adorable, all the things. But also in that moment, grief.
Yeah.
Grief curled up in the room with us as I did not ignore, but I acknowledged the fact that there's a woman who left that room with empty arms. And it wrecked me. I mean, I mean, Tim, it wrecked me.
Mm-hmm.
I remember just sitting there, holding him and crying silently and just thinking, man, what a gift it is to be his mom. But God, I'm so sorry it has to be this way. Like I was just tore up inside. And it took me a while to reconcile that I can be thrilled and overjoyed and celebrate this new life in our family while also acknowledging and making room for sorrow, his loss, her loss,
Mm-hmm.
the loss um, in over the years of just even first birthdays of milestones of going. I'm so as I'm snapping a picture and texting it to his first mom. There's this. I'm so thrilled to be celebrating my son's birthday. At the same time, I'm really sorry that that she's not here for it. And open adoptions can mean a variety of different things, and we see them on a regular basis and do different things. And we have some friends who have open adoptions where their kids' first families come to their birthdays and celebrate those milestones, and we hope to be that one day. But right now, they're just not ready for that yet, and so we have to respect and honor that, and we have to make space for both joy, celebration, excitement, respect for one another's stories and different perspectives of the stories, but then also loss, grief, heartache, missing first family. Mother's Day is another practical example. On Mother's Day, I am not placing all my expectations on my children to not have any negative feelings. And so when it comes to Mother's Day, I welcome whatever celebration we get. At the same time, I make sure to create space in our family where I go to, especially our oldest son, say, hey, if you are missing your first mom today, I want you to know that's okay. And you're allowed to do that. And if you're not, that's okay too. Um, but there is space for you to be sad that you can't see her today. And we just want to make space for both to exist. I don't want to push
Mm-hmm.
sorrow and grief on a child. I don't want to push celebration on a child. I want to let them show up in their own place in the journey and just walk with them in that. But we've got to make sure that there's kind of space for both to exist because that is adoption. It's both and.
Yep, and that walks right into the topic. You already mentioned it, open adoption, and what that looks like. And uh, you do a good job of explaining it in the book, and even in the back, you give just your full definition of open adoption, which is great. I think it's a lot of people coming into adoption don't understand it, and it might be scary. I know it was for us when we first jumped in. I'm like, what in the world is this? Is this co-parenting? Is this? And we talked a lot about it on the podcast. But I would like you to share. It's always more powerful to hear stories of people that are actually living open adoption, because adoption doesn't end when the baby's placed with you.
Absolutely.
It's for a lifetime. And you already mentioned the joy and sorrow, and that comes in open adoption and making space for that and making space for their first families. That's open adoption. And it doesn't have to look the same for everybody. But I'd like you to talk about a little bit more about what open adoption looks like and might look like in the future for you. I mean, you can't know what the future is going to hold, but you know how you might react.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things we have, I will say, every open adoption is unique. And I can say that because we have
Mm-hmm.
two open adoptions and they are very different. And, but both are so precious to us. And I think if you had asked me before we started the domestic adoption process, Brittany, what are your feelings towards open adoption? I probably would have said that seems scary.
Mm-hmm.
That seems scary. I'm not sure what that looks like. Kind of like you said, are we co-parenting? What does that mean? Um, but as our story has kind of unfolded, we went into a hospital thinking it was a closed adoption, and we were so grateful that from in a period of 48 hours, it went from closed to fully open, and so it was a fast and furious shift for us. But once we met our son's first mom, um, her story and our story became intertwined, and I didn't want to let that go. Um, I had such an immense amount of respect for her, an immense amount of respect for the decisions that she was making, for her courage, for her bravery, for her story, her unique story. And what I knew deep down in that moment was I want our son, hers and mine, I wanted our son to have access to his heritage story from her. I wanted him more than anything in this world to be able to ask her questions about, you know, medical questions, about her personal story, about kind of his origin story even. And I wanted that relationship, and I knew that from the moment I met her. And what we have done and have always said is we're open to open adoption, but we let the first moms and the birth moms decide what that looks like to them, whether that's seeing each other, whether it's not seeing each other. When we left the hospital, it was she and I would communicate, but we're not going to see each other in person. 6 months later, we got together and at a local Chick-fil-A and sat and while she held our son again. And so I think there's just got to be some flexibility in a little bit of being okay with not knowing how it's going to turn out, but knowing that you are for her, that you're for her success, that you're for your shared child success, and that you guys together can create really good boundaries. And that's kind of what we did. And that's what we decided for our first open adoption. For our second one, it was a lot more interpersonal because we were matched really early on, and she wanted significant contact. She wanted to know our family well before she placed her son into our family. And so we spent a lot of time with her while she was pregnant. And I have spent a lot of time with her since as well. And we live in different states, but she comes out and visits, and it's been just different. And it's I think that's the thing that I think adoptive families go into it. And I was the same way. I wanted to know exactly what it would look like. And the truth is, every time it's been different. And I'm assuming this next time it will be different as well. And that's okay. But the goal is to always honor your child's first family and their first stories. That does not mean that you're a doormat. It doesn't mean you have no boundaries. But in agreement, in this partnership with birth moms, you two get to decide what is in the best interest for the child, and what is in the best interest for them as a mom and as a birth mom, or not a birth mom, but also I don't like to speak on their behalf, but I can say from our children's birth moms, they have always placed the best interests of our children first and foremost. And so we kind of view that as a partnership there, and we do all the parenting. You know, I don't really ask them questions about parenting. We don't do any of that. And they don't overstep their bounds at all in that. And they've always respected that. And so I've been really grateful for that, and that they have always been super complimentary, super saying, hey, I love the way you parent. I'm going to write this down, you know, for this, or, hey, that's a really, you know, good idea. Or, hey, thank you for responding in that way. And so we're really fortunate. And I don't know, I know a lot of horror stories, I've heard a lot of horror stories, but that's just not been our case. And so we have loved our experience with them. And our third adoption might be different. I don't know, but we're so grateful for our son's first families and for their willingness to kind of stay connected to us.
Yeah, I think it starts with you got the right approach, and how it starts with you are open to having that relationship with your child's first families. You respect them, you love on them, you kind of leave it up to them to have the relationship grow while you still have the ability, you're still parenting, you still have the ability to set boundaries if needed. I think that's the most important thing is anybody who's going into an adoption is to have that, I don't want to say empathy, but thinking about their first family and what's good for them and good for your child. Because now, like I said before, adoption doesn't end when that baby's placed with you. That first family, no matter how much connection you have with them, no matter how much you want to talk to them or visit them or anything like that, they're always going to be part of your world, your family. And if you come to it with that kind of an attitude, I think things will work out much better than you hoped. I'm not saying you'll never have problems, but I think if you come with that kind of an attitude, it's the best way to start, especially for your child. And open adoption doesn't have to be scary if you have that kind of a mentality towards it. Because ultimately, when you're thinking about adoption and you're pursuing it, and even when you're creating your adoption profile, right, and you're putting yourself out there, and you're like, oh, what do I put in there that's going to be so magnetic and pull this expectant mom in that wants to choose us? Well, she just wants to know, ultimately, that her child is loved, cared for, protected, all those things that she may not be able to provide. And so,
Yeah.
that was pretty evident in what you just were explaining in your stories there too, is that they changed their mind, didn't want to have visits, and then 6 months later she's holding him again. A part of that, I'm sure, is that she wanted to see firsthand that yes, he's being taken care of and loved. He's happy, healthy, all the things that she wanted for him.
You're right. It's not always easy. But I will say, even in some of the hard moments of our open adoption, because I want to be careful and honor some of these stories well, I do want to encourage adoptive families. The first response shouldn't be, hey, I'm cutting you off. The first response should be, how can we problem solve together? So here is something that made me uncomfortable, and in communicating that clearly and then working on a problem solving solution. So I'm not saying that our open adoptions have never had any sort of conflict.
Right.
However, I will say what I have found is when we approach each other with mutual respect, we can problem solve together because we are so for our kid.
Yep. And that goes no matter if you are adopting cross-culturally, transracially, that happens no matter what. If you could go though back in time now and give yourself a piece of advice before you're adopting, and maybe it has to do with open adoption, but what would that advice be if you had to give yourself advice before you started the adoption process?
I think my biggest piece of advice to, I guess, younger me would be to never stop learning. So one of those things was, I read a lot before we adopted, and then afterwards, I think like I took a break. And part of that was I just think we had a lot of kids who were little, and but the goal is to never stop learning and always be willing to read a different perspective than you, listen to adoptee voices, listen to birth mom voices, try to read and listen and learn as much as you can. And to not feel like, to tell myself, you don't have to have it right now.
Right.
You just have to be willing to grow. Like you don't have to know it all. You don't have to have it all down. You just have to be willing to continually be humble, to pursue adoption education, even years after the fact, and be willing to change. And that's okay. We don't have to be perfect. Nobody can be a perfect family or perfect parents, regardless of whether your children are adopted or they're biological. As parents, we're always growing, we're always learning, we're always seeing how we can do better, and that's okay. And so I think I would tell my younger self that, because I think I was so worried about getting it all right from the beginning, that I was maybe paralyzed for a little bit. But thankfully, through God's grace and through community and friends and different people and various voices I was listening to, I kind of got brought back into this kind of realm of education and learning a little bit more.
Yeah. And one kind of common theme throughout your book is, and you have a whole chapter dedicated to it, is adoption. It's not about you. I love that.
Yeah.
Because it's so true. I mean, it's everything that we're just talking about with open adoption. I mean, and it's about your child. It's about their first family. It's about all of those things. And that's your common theme throughout the whole book, which I love. That's exactly right. And anybody that's not adopted yet, even if you have adopted, that's a very important concept to grasp. It's not about you. I think people outside of adoption look at it and go, "Oh, it was so great of you to adopt, and you're you're so blessed to be able to adopt." I'm like, well, yes, we are, but it's not about us
at all. Yeah. And I think when we get that twisted, that's actually when a lot of harm can happen. When we make things about, that's in every aspect of life. When we start making our marriage about us, when we start making what church we go to about us, when we start making life about us, our selfishness starts to poison the thing. And so I think it's such an important lesson, especially for adoptive parents, to quickly know you are not adopting a child to finish your family or to complete your family. That it's not to complete anything in your life. That is not a good reason to adopt at all. And so there are a variety of reasons to choose to adopt, but making it about you is not one of them.
Yeah. And to reiterate that point in your book, I love how you have spots in your book where you have an adoptee voice. An adoptee actually writes, part of spaces in your book about from their perspective on certain topics. I mean, I just love that. I mean, all of us need to hear too, how adoptees actually feel, how it actually, how things have happened to them as they've grown up as an
Yeah.
adoptee. And that's such a big part of your book. I love that.
It's actually my favorite part of the whole thing, if I'm
Yeah,
being
I
honest.
could see
It's the
that.
parts that other people wrote and reading through. And honestly, a fun fact is I didn't give them topics to write on. I
Oh,
said, hey, I want you to share pieces of your story, whatever you feel comfortable or led to share. Here's the word count,
hmm,
and we'll see what comes in. And it was amazing. Not like I didn't have to tweak any of the topics. It all fit into the book perfectly. And I didn't even give them an outline of what I was writing. They knew they knew the title and they knew my goal, and they came up with their essays all on their own, and
wow.
I love them. It's my absolute favorite thing
They
in the
they
whole
did a
book.
great job. Yeah, wow. Yeah, that is probably my favorite part as well. Do you have any words like of advice or maybe encouragement for adoptive parents, maybe who have children that are starting to grow up, like me? My kids are like 15, 9, and 5 now, and they're learning a little bit more. They're, as they grow up, they learn more about their story. And they know it takes more than love, which is what your book is all about. Do you have any advice or encouragement for us, or for people listening that are, when their children start to get older, what does, and they're learning about it takes more than love, what kind of advice or encouragement do you have for us?
Well, my first thing I want to say is I think sometimes as parents or at least for me personally, I'm quick to kind of fall into that like shame trap
Hmm.
where I'm like, oh man, I wish I wish I'd done this differently, or I should have, could have, would have, should have done this. And the first thing I would say, my biggest piece of advice is do not let shame keep you from moving forward.
Mm.
Don't let it be a weight to moving forward. And so, if you are just now going, my eyes are just now opening to this, and I wish I had thought about this when my kids were toddlers. What I want to say is just welcome. You are welcome here, and you're welcome along this journey. And your journey is unique um, and special of its own, because all of ours are. And there is no shame in showing up and saying, you know what, I'm late to the game, but I'm here. Let's do this together. And so my advice would be to don't let shame hold you back, but rather let conviction serve as a catalyst to press in and to keep learning and to make the changes now. It's never too late to change. That it's never too late to sit your kids down and say, "Hey, I probably should have had this conversation with
Hmm.
you many years ago, but I'm going to have it now, and I just want you to know that I'm sorry for not bringing this up earlier, but I love you. I am here for you if you have any feelings about this. And we're going to learn together as a family, and it's going to be awkward and it's going to be quirky, but we're going to do this together. I'm here for the journey." There's no shame in that. That is a brave, courageous thing to do. And so don't let shame keep you from doing hard work, but rather let any conviction that you have serve as a catalyst to kind of say, all right, what's my next best step here? What do I need to do next? What changes do we need to make in our family to better equip our kids and walk with them in this?
Yeah, I love that. Not so focusing on the past or what you did or didn't do right. What are you going to do today? What are you going to do
Yeah,
tomorrow? How can you help your kids in the best way possible? And they're going to have questions. I mean, learning, like you said before, I mean, learning is key. They're going to have questions. They're going to ask more things. You should try to be as prepared as you can, uh, but give yourself some grace. Yeah, I like that.
absolutely. Absolutely. That and find an adoption informed counselor.
There you go.
that
That's right.
so that is my biggest piece of advice. Forget the shame and find an adoption informed counselor.
That is a great point. Yes, yes. We all need that. I wanted to ask you, the subtitle of your book is "A Christian Guide to Navigating the Complexities of Cross-Cultural Adoption." Does somebody pick this book up, or as they're listening and just go, "Oh, well, I'm not Christian, so it doesn't apply to me. I don't need a Christian guide." What would you say to that?
You know, it's I love this question. I think you're the first person who's asked me this. Um, it was a conversation we had when writing this book. I'm partnering with a Christian publisher, and it's obviously I'm a person of faith, and so
Hmm.
faith largely informs my perspective. It is why I do what I do.
Yeah.
It informs how I look at the world. But I wanted this book, even though It is faith-based. For some of the practicalities, you don't have to be a person of faith to learn about race-conscious parenting. You don't have to be a person of faith to learn about trauma-informed parenting and how to not have a savior complex. Those things are still applicable today. And I wanted to say in the book to people, hey, my faith informs this, but you're still welcome here. And you can disagree with my faith and you're still welcome here. And I will say the last few chapters of the book become a little bit more, I think the last two explain my faith a little bit more and how it kind of, how I view the world. But up until the last two chapters, I would say the majority of the content is really applicable to anyone. And even the last two chapters, they're maybe a little more heavy on the faith, but you can still read it and say, I'm not a person of faith, but I can be on board with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's not only for people of faith or for Christians. But it is largely informed by my faith practices, and it's produced by a Christian publisher.
Absolutely. I would 100% agree with that after reading the book. You're not going to get slapped in the face with your Christianity. That's not what you're about. And but you do express your faith, which is beautiful throughout the books too. So I love that part too. So I think it was just very, very well written, and I highly recommend it. Anybody listening to this, so much more that we could unpack in the book, but I think you just get it and read it and share it, like we said, with others in your friends and family circles, and those who you may know that may be considering adoption. It's definitely a must read for that. And the last thing I wanted to just ask you is, where can folks connect with you? Where can they find your book? Where can they connect with you?
You can find my book on Amazon, Target, Barnes and Noble, any place where you can buy books online, you can get my book. But you can connect with me online. I am most active over on Instagram at Brittany in Salmon, but also at my website, which is brittanyandsalmon.com.
And we'll have all those links in the show notes for this episode, so you don't have to write them down if you're driving and listening to this.
Yes, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that, please. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing with us. It's a great book, and your stories weaving through all the book are fabulous too. It just makes it a really quick and easy read, and like I said before, a must read. So I think anybody needs to go out and grab it. And I just really appreciate you coming on and sharing all your stories and wisdom with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
All right. Great interview with Brittany. Oh man, so much good stuff, good wisdom, good advice, good things to think about. I highly recommend going and checking out her book, It Takes More Than Love, A Christian Guide to Navigating in the Complexities of Cross-Cultural Adoption. There are links in the show notes at infantadoptionguide.com/99. This is the 99th episode. You can find them all there and get the book and share it. I think even getting multiple copies of the book and sharing it with your friends and family is important, or at least passing it around and telling them to read the chapter on adoption allies. That is huge. And so before we go, I wanted to just remind you that we've got this wonderful, amazing community that's just building and building, and it's called the Infant Adoption Guide Community, where you can join and just learn about all the things in the adoption process, chat about them, and getting very specific. You can get out of these Facebook groups that are fine in their own right, but you kind of get dumped into this 3, 4, 5,000 member big support group, and you don't even know what to ask. And you may have asked the same question that somebody asked a week ago, and you didn't know they asked that. And you're just trying to find some information, somebody that could help you and support you as you're learning about adoption. You want to get into it, or you're already adopted. Adoption doesn't end when the baby's placed with you too. So this community is helping you all the way through the process and beyond. And it's called the Infant Adoption Guide Community at infantadoptionguide.com/membership. Jump in there. If you have questions about it, you can just email me directly at tim@infantadoptionguide.com. You want to know more about it, but on that page, it'll explain everything there is to know about the community, especially our exclusive small buddy groups that get you personally connected with 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other people that will help hold your hand as you hold their hand and learn and grow and know what you need to know and find other people that are doing the same thing you're doing, going building your family through adoption. So thank you so much for joining me today. We'll talk to you next time as we get number 100, our episode next time. It's going to be a very special episode. Hope you can join me, and I'll talk to you later. Until then, you are in my prayers as you go through your adoption journey. Take care.
Thanks for listening to my dad.